Rebonjour à tous. Welcome back, everyone. I would kindly ask you to make your way to your seats. We'll be starting very shortly. Rebonjour, messieurs, dames. Merci de bien vouloir regagner vos places. Nous allons commencer très rapidement.
we have very big gaps in financing. We've known this ever since the SDGs actually started 10 or so years ago. But it's become even more challenging. I think we all know there's slippage in terms of progress towards the SDGs. That will be a subject of discussion at Seville at the FFD number 4, the Financing for Development Conference number 4. And so it's very, very clear that Africa needs to take a much more active role in co-financing its own development and actually leading more and more. The scale is always going to be so big that Africa can never make much of a dent on its own. But Africa can be a much smarter player. We can be a more catalytic force. We can crowd in a lot more partners in a way that perhaps we haven't in the past. So even within the development finance industry, the global partners, the traditional development finance partners may not have the same kind of financial power that they had 5 years ago because of competing demands on public budgets in the OECD countries. As we've seen, big cuts are coming through. These cuts have yet to manifest in many MDBs, but the outlook is a lot more sobering today. So the imperative of African development finance, the imperative of African capital markets, the imperative of African commercial banks, all coming together to multiply the power of African capital is so important. And in that process, of course, institutional investors like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds have a very, very big role to play. Not just in terms of providing the capital, but also pulling up their sleeves and providing early stage leadership in getting projects off the ground or close to getting off the ground so that other willing partners from other parts of the world, be it nearby Gulf countries, the GCC countries, other Asian economies that still have a lot of surplus and interest to invest in Africa, you know, we have to prepare the ground better for them. In fact, the one common theme we've been seeing in many conferences for many years is there is capital. There's international capital available for infrastructure, for profitable projects that can pay the hurdle rates that are applicable. But the problem also is, you know, we've not actually prepared projects to a stage where partners are prepared to come in and invest and co-finance alongside African promoters. So there's also a problem in terms of early stage project preparation and development. This is a theme that is not new, but we realize that we talk about it a lot, but there's just not enough resourcing coming through at that particular level of the stream. Fortunately, several MDBs are doing more in that regard. We are seeing a new breed of African DFIs playing a much more forceful role in working much more closely with developers to get projects up and running to a stage where they can now start attracting less equity-like capital that's willing to come in. The Africa Finance Corporation is a case in point. This morning we heard from Badia, TDB Group, of course African Development Bank is a big player. And we have new MDBs also coming from other parts of the world. We have the AIIB, we have the New Development Bank. So there are many role players, but I think in the end Africans have to really get much more serious to recognize the supply side of finance is getting narrower, and access is not going to be any easier. In fact, it's going to be more difficult.
And in terms of your own institution, so if you want to crowd in investors, we've got the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Nigeria here, Sovereign Wealth Fund of Azerbaijan, we've got other institutional investors as well, 91 for example. So have you got the instruments for them to be able to co-invest, to be able to place money with you that will give them that return that they're seeking?
Absolutely, Omar. In fact, already about 10 years ago, I don't know if it was just foresight or we had the right strategy in good time. We recognized that just chasing taxpayer money to capitalize African DFIs was not going to give us the results we were looking for. So we started reaching out to institutional investors fairly early on, not just to buy our paper in capital markets, which is something we've always been doing, and every MDB does that. typical bonds, right? But we've actually gone further to attract a lot of institutional investors into our balance sheet through different segments of the equity side of the balance sheet, but also now introducing hybrid capital alongside other players. And so we today count at least 3 sovereign wealth funds in our equity as TDB Group. We have the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Rwanda, of Angola. We have pension funds from here in Djibouti. We have pension funds from Mauritius, from Seychelles. We have them from Uganda. We have them from Mozambique. We have some coming in from other countries. All in all, we have about 20 institutional investors in our balance sheet. And this is not usual business. This is typically not how DFIs have capitalized themselves. Of course, there's a lot of detail that goes into what makes that possible. One has to be able to deliver a triple bottom line value proposition so that one can actually remunerate capital in a manner that is acceptable to those institutional investors. And so that's been happening a lot. And there's a few of us who've done this very well. We've also actually gone beyond just the normal business of capitalizing the main balance sheets. We've been setting up special purpose funds. Again, a few of us have done that. Together with Badia, about 4 or 5 years ago, we established a dedicated trade finance fund with its own balance sheet, its own separate group of shareholders. It started very small. Today, we're on our way to $300 million, and we've set a target of $1 billion by 2027. This is a very young institution, and on the back of that, just this month, we're launching a new fund for housing, a housing fund in partnership with Shelter Afrique, with the World Bank Group as a key anchor with us on that. And again, it's also about innovating the landscape of development finance, where we don't always do business as usual, but you actually give life to new horses that investors can ride, and member states or private sector clients in a big way can have access to special purpose funding that's long-term, and that actually goes beyond the normal frameworks that we've had in the past.
So I think I read recently that the Action Group went to the AFDB for a line of credit. And but the question I ask myself is, why aren't the commercial banks playing that role? Why are we talking more about the DFIs today in Africa than we are about our commercial banks?
Well, actually, African commercial banks have been a big success story since the turn of the millennium, where in 2025, if you were to do a graph to show the assets under management on the commercial banking side, it's been phenomenal. It's been an exponential growth. There's been a lot of necessary reforms that have happened. The commercial banking space is a lot richer today than it's ever been, but it's coming from a low base. And the reality is the demands in Africa, financial sector development, still is got a lot of gaps. It's still underdeveloped. And apart from commercial banks, it's the same story with capital markets. Today we have some 30 or so capital markets on the continent. But again, the problem is they're not active enough. There's not enough listings. And so there's a lot more to be done there. But yeah, DFIs have an ability that commercial banks don't have, which is to go long. We can play the long game. We can take a lot more risk than commercial banks can. We were designed for that purpose. And of course, with the Agenda 2063 plan, the African continent wants to industrialize. It's not just funding poverty alleviation anymore. It's funding mainstream economic development that requires, capital that is not always going to be subsidized. You need market-related funding that can come in and drive industrial development, and PPPs also that may not need subsidized credit. And so this is where DFIs can come in and help provide a blend of capital together with other partners, and sort of wean Africa away from too much dependency on conventional aid, if one can call it that. Because that's just drying up in a very big way. And even development finance, which is not exactly aid, it's maybe partially aid, that is going to get even much more difficult to access in the months and years to come for the reasons that we're all observing globally. Right? There's a diversion effect happening. There's new priorities. The geoeconomic landscape worldwide is going to have a very big impact on the amount of access to capital that we will have through the conventional mechanisms and conduits. So this is where sovereign wealth funds really become very important. Together with other African institutional players, we need to find ways to multiply our capital, because we will just not succeed in expecting the traditional sources to come through in the way that we wanted. And I think there's some good news for us, because there's a lot of surplus capital in regions like the Gulf that have realized that there is need to step in more boldly into the African economic landscape. We're seeing that with two particular countries, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, beginning to really show interest. This is, of course, in addition to the others that have been less traditional in Africa. Of course, the Chinese, the Indians, the Japanese, even the Koreans these days are showing a lot more interest. So, it's about being much more open-minded, much more innovative, and just not knocking on the usual doors every day, right? You take what you can from the established sources, but you start very aggressively looking to new sources.
So there's a saying that says, if you can keep a cool head when everyone else is losing theirs, you've underestimated the gravity of the situation. But with everything that's going on, what's your reading in terms of the economic volatility and the headwinds that you're facing?
Well, we just came into 2025 a quarter ago. As we were closing December, most of us were in fairly good spirits, because a lot of the difficulty of the initial shocks that we had faced in recent years were kind of behind us, right? So you started to see recovery, economic growth rates. This year we're seeing Africa being projected to hit 4.1% GDP growth. 2024 was 3.2. It's been pretty flat ever since COVID. We've hardly recovered, even though some countries have done well, including Djibouti, which did 7.3 last year. And there was a little sense of optimism, because we were really getting into an upbeat moment, right? Because the debt issues, the fiscal account deficits, the current account deficits, all the macro headwinds were stabilizing, and we were looking forward to a much more auspicious 2025. It's still looking okay. It's too soon to maybe judge too much, but it's clear that the uncertainty has really come in a big way. It's not necessarily going to be an all bad story. There could be some unexpected silver linings. For instance, everybody is fully aware of what's happening on the trade policy side. A lot of African countries have been spared by being in the lower range of the new tariffs. So what this does is it gives a little bit more of an impetus to those African countries that are sitting in the 10% range to be able to be, the next platforms for producing, exportable items, especially textiles and clothing, for example, as well as some agricultural products, into not just the neighboring regions of Africa, which has a lot of potential, but even further away, as places like China, right? You're seeing a lot more demand coming in from China for even agricultural products. So there will be opportunities. U.S. will be much more interesting for African export processing zones, EPZs. Those that have not been hit with very high tariffs, I think, will be much more interesting, having seen what's happened to Vietnam and some of the other countries that have much higher tariff levels. Of course, these may be dynamic matters. It may not, that these levels may not always hold. These may be negotiating positions. So it's too soon to draw big conclusions. But there could be silver linings. The other silver lining, of course, is the continent has been a little bit, how can I say, upset with the international financial community for not backing Africa on the transition side of the energy agenda. everybody had agreed that natural gas would be an acceptable transition fuel. But the reality has been, even though it was agreed at the apex level in the climate negotiations, in practical terms, a lot of the traditional partners of Africa have been reluctant to come in on natural gas. And so the silver lining I'm seeing now is those who follow this sector will have seen US Exim Bank approving a $5 billion significant loan for one of the Mozambique natural gas projects that just happened a month ago. And it looks like at least some of those segments of the energy space are going to get a little bit of an uplift because, you know, as much as we're all for renewable energies and very committed to the climate agenda, the truth is we still need some level of financing for these transition sectors in energy. And the truth is a lot of our conventional partners have been a little bit cold on that front. And I think the new sort of posture coming out of the US, I know a lot of African stakeholders in this space are smiling. They're saying, well, at least our transition agenda may get a little bit of wind in the sails.
Fantastic. On that positive note, thank you very much, Mr. Admasu Tadesse, Group CEO of TDB. Thank you. So I've got a quick announcement to make. I know we're entering the age of digital, but La Poste de Djibouti is one of our partners, and they've got some postcards, stamped postcards, for you to get and send to your loved ones back home. So there'll be a desk out there for some stamped postcards that you can send, and it'll be a great surprise. We received too many emails, but when was the last postcard that you received? So, but without further ado, I'd like to call upon our digital expert, Mr. Lassina Kone, who's the CEO, Director General of Smart Africa, who's just come back from the AI Summit in Kigali and is going to be reporting back for us in terms of the outcomes of the AI Summit. So can you give us a 3 or 5 point summary of what was agreed at the AI Summit, what were the discussion points, and what were the areas that we need to look out for?
Thank you very much, Omar, for inviting me. I think it's the right time because what we're just discussing with the Prime Minister right now. He said after the Paris Summit, what's going on with Africa? Well, I'm happy here to announce that, you know, the outcome of this summit, Global AI Summit on Africa, we were able to create the Africa AI Council under the Secretariat of Smart Africa, of course, and the leadership of African Union and ITU. It's actually a global corporate platform, which will actually position Africa as the leader in area of useful artificial intelligence. I mean by that, looking at the sustainability, look at the ethical issue, and look at the inclusion issue. That is really the visions. And the mission is really to be able to guide our governments in terms of elaborations of the national AI strategies, regionals, and the national, and so on and so forth. AI is a very important topic. I mean, it's a very extremely important, particularly for Africa. I believe that it is a moment right now because it should be an equalizer and not a divider of the best from the rest.
So we were having a quick chat yesterday, and you said something a little bit controversial. Well, you said you need to support our private sector, but what you also said is that governments cannot overtax the digital sector, cannot overtax the telecoms companies. We need to support them to be able to be globally competitive. So maybe you can tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, when the America talks about the AI, $500 billion US, it is backing its private sector, the open AI and so forth. When France is talking about AI, they're behind the private sector, Mistral. When China is talking about AI, they're behind DeepSeek and Alibaba. Who are we behind? Who trusted Africa and invest in Africa and stay paying taxes and they have our sovereignty? These are our private sector. Yeah. People like Axion, MTN, Airtel, Orange, they've been in the continent for the past 25-something years. So who are we supporting? The government should be creating a conducive environment for those private sector. We need to propel those private. These are our Afro champion. Because government is not, you can't wake up a civil servant at 3 o'clock in the morning that the data is not working. It is our private sector. They are on the continent. They trusted us. These are the people who should be leading our AI. And you've already seen it, you know, Cassava is cutting a deal with NVIDIA. You will be seeing, I'm hoping to see soon, Axion, MTN, Airtel. These are the people we should be supporting. Now, it's good to dream. Then we're going to say, oh, where are we going to get the money from? $500 billion, $200 billion of France, of Europe? In fact, our ecosystem is an autonomous ecosystem. You don't say, where am I going to get the money from? You basically have to optimize the way it's done. But the way we are looking at it today, the MNOs are getting a lot of pressure in terms of taxes. I will suggest, in fact, I'm advocating with our government, don't look at the tax, look at the other side of the coins, revenue. Why? Only 46% of our populations are connected today. And the tax is high. The oil screaming is high, 46%. Within that, you have about 50% usage gap. You know what does that actually mean? It's a disaster. It means close to 50% of our population, they have the infrastructure available, but they're not using it. Because it's affordability, because of smart devices, because of the local content, because of the cyber. So why don't we try to grab those 50%? But the only way to do that, you reduce the taxes, basically the penetration of broadband goes higher, the government picks up whatever they lost in the tax in terms of revenue. I mean, I think it's better to have 1% of 100 billion, 0% of 1 trillion. It's really true. So we've been working on this together with the UNICA, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, to look at the taxation model optimization. All the modeling shows that countries that actually reduce the taxes, not only reduce, make it pass through to the consumer, actually the growing. The contribution of the GDP by the ICT is growing. So this is where we can get the money. That's one point. Where do we get the rest of the money? Any country here getting any revenue from the GAFAM, they call it today the Seven Magnificent. That's where AI also comes into play. We all have a social media. The Action is paying taxes in the country. Is the Meta paying any taxes in the country? No. Typically, that is the data colonization, which is infinite. We have to figure out a way. It is a true reality. We came out with a study 3 years ago. We call it OTT Impact. Unanimously, all our regulators say something has to be done about OTT because the pipe is getting filled up with the social media data. Yet they're paying a universal access fee, they're paying VAT, they're paying digital-specific taxes, but the other folks are sitting in Ireland, they're not paying anything. And today, I think someone said it here, we're in a geopolitical, people are weaponizing today the AI. Where are we, Africa, in terms of all this? So it's very important to rethink about the whole thing. Thank you.
And my last question will go back to Djibouti, if I may. So I hear that there are 10 landing cables here, landing in Djibouti, undersea cables. So, I mean, but what I don't understand is what does it mean for the country and how can the country attract investments thanks to these cables?
That's a very good question. You see, first of all, Djibouti is about security. Djibouti is about connectivity. 10 submarine cable landing. Also, one thing you need to realize, Djibouti is about access to 640 million population of COMESA. What are the ingredients? What are the prerequisites for an AI? Infrastructure in terms of telco, submarine cable, we have it in Djibouti. We need the renewable energy to make the AI sustainable. I heard the plan for 2035 renewable energy plan. So what else Djibouti need? The only thing Djibouti need is to create a conducive environment for investors. That's all Djibouti need. Because I always say, we always turn things down that it boils down to financing, access to capital. I hear happy. No. In our ecosystem, digital economy, no. Access to capital is like the rain. For it to rain, you need certain conditions of the cloud. Those conditions are the regulatory environment. That makes a difference between Singapore and Cameroon. It makes a difference between Dubai and Nigeria. You don't wait for your future, you make it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lassina Kone, Director General of Smart Africa. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you. Merci, c'est très bien.
Very much, Omar, and your wonderful guests. So we'll now move, ladies and gentlemen, to a powerful plenary session. As we know, investing in Africa requires more than capital. It demands clarity, courage, and a deep understanding of the forces reshaping our world. And to help us decode those forces, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome now someone who has been at the forefront of strategic thinking on the continent. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Acha Leke, Senior Partner and Chairman of McKinsey & Company Africa. Big round of applause for Dr. Leke, please.
Okay. Sorry. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. It's my first time to Djibouti. Very impressed, and looking forward to coming back. What we thought we would do is just share with you some of our latest thinking from McKinsey on what's happening across the continent. Right? There's a lot of changes around the world, and we've been doing some research to understand what are the implications for the continent. While waiting for a clicker, maybe I'll just have the team. And I just brought a few slides, and then we can have a longer conversation down. If you go to the next slide, and we said, look, if we're going to do this, we should probably start by taking a longer, oh, there is a clicker coming. Perfect. Thank you. There you go. Well, let's take a longer lens. Let's not just take the last few years, right? We took a lens starting from the 1990s. And as you remember, thank you. In the 1990s, sort of, we were growing at 2.7% in the context where population grows at 2.7%, so we're not making any progress. Then came the 2000s, where growth shot up to over 5%. This is across the continent, right? This is the Africa Rising story. We all got hugely excited about it. Then, look at the 2010 to 2020 growth slowed down, and really you can see it's productivity that really started to drag down the growth. And now we started to look at the last 3-4 years, and what we were starting to see, growth is still sort of, as Matsu said, about 3.2%. You're starting to see a bit of an uptick in productivity. The question is, is that real or is it not? So I think that's a fundamental question. I'm going to show you some analysis here that shows that maybe we're starting to see a bit of an economic recovery across the continent. But that's what's happened over the last sort of, 30, 35 years. Now, this is across the entire continent, but as we know, it's not one Africa. And so here we basically just plotted growth rates between 2003 and 2013 on one axis and 2013 to 2023. And you clearly see 4 sets of countries, right? You see the consistent growers, and that's been led by Ethiopia and Rwanda. And these are countries that have grown. I always say Ethiopia has grown at sort of, 7-8%, not for 1 year, not for 5, not for 10, but for 20 years, right? Rwanda has grown at 6% for 20 years, and that's what it takes to reduce poverty. That's what it really takes, right? We need to have such strong growth. So on the consistent growth, there tend to be a lot of sort of, you can see the East African countries there with a few West African countries. On the top left is the recent accelerators. They've accelerated the growth in the last 10 years, and there you'll see many of the sort of West African, Francophone West African countries primarily. Bottom left, countries where growth has slowed down, right? You can clearly see Nigeria there. You can see Morocco, growth has slowed down in the last 10 years. And bottom left is countries that unfortunately have been slow growing for 20 years. I'm based in South Africa. South Africa is there, but also Algeria is in there. And by the way, 9 of the 10 smallest economies in Africa tend to be in that bucket. Right? So that's what you see, you're seeing across the continent. Now, where do I start to get a bit of hope? So we start to do this analysis. We said, let's look at, so the average here, the average is sort of 3.5%. That's interesting, but again, when population grows at 2.7%, it doesn't give you much room. Now, if you look at, if you put 6% as a target, how many countries have grown over 6% or during that period? So in the top, in 2000s, we had 16 countries that represented about 30% of our GDP, right? That grew over 6%. That dropped down to 9 countries between 2010 and 2020, to 15, right? So somehow we're starting to see a bit of this trend where we have more countries that are growing at 6% now. Again, this only represents about 20% of our GDP, right? So it's not enough because it tends to be many of our small countries, right? We need our bigger countries to be humming again, but at least you're seeing a bit of a trajectory there. So that's on the countryside. If you take on the sector lens, and we've talked a bit about services this morning already, there's a huge shift away from agriculture into services, right? So agriculture used to account for about 60% of employment across Africa. Today it accounts for about 50%, right? And you can see all of that shit has gone into services. So we see a massive, massive revolution of services, which brings huge opportunities. But the real challenge we have across all of these sectors is a productivity challenge. Here we benchmarked our productivity in Africa across the entire economy and across the different sectors to other regions, right? Whether it's India, whether it's LATAM or China. And you can see we're always on the left, right? We're probably the least productive, the second least productive. So that is the biggest issue we have in Africa today, is how do we unlock productivity across all of our sectors on the continent. We also said, well, you know, part of what we need, and we heard about it this morning, we actually, you know, we need revenue to drive these investments, right? So the question, how much revenue are we generating as a continent? And again, the bottom line, the green is Africa. This is revenue to GDP, right? You have Africa, and then you have LATAM, you have North America and Europe, right? You see Europe is at 40% to GDP. So they're monetizing their economy. We are about 20%. Right now, you know, it's low. And by the way, you can see the CAGR between 2010 and 2020, that was going down. Again, you know, over the last 4 years, it's starting to increase. We'll clearly say not fast enough, but at least it's on the upward trajectory where our governments are starting to generate more revenue. You know, the countries like Nigeria, even Ethiopia, where revenue to GDP is less than 10%, right? So it's hard to then stimulate your economy when you have the levels that low, right? So we really need to be able to figure out how to drive more revenue. Now, but what happens when we have these revenues? Part of the challenge we have is we use quite a bit of that money to then pay off debt, right? Look at, even though I always said Africa, we can talk about different countries, but on average in Africa, I always say we don't really have a debt crisis, we have a debt servicing crisis, right? So debt to GDP is about 70% across Africa. You used to see it compared to other regions, but our debt service to revenue is the highest in the world, right? Because our debt is expensive, right? So that's one of the challenges that we need to look to address on the continent. Is the debt service, because that then takes away revenue that governments could then actually spend more in, whether it's healthcare, education, and they'll need more of that going forward, given some of the challenges. Talking about that, we then started to look at, okay, if you don't have enough revenue, where else can the money come from? I didn't put in the investment slides, but we talked about it this morning. We looked at development assistance. We know that it's changing around the world. Africa, about 40% of ODA was coming into Africa, right? About 40% of ODA. It came down a bit with the Ukraine crisis, where a lot of the money went into that region, but about 40% of ODA came into the continent. Now, if you look at this, is just U.S. bilateral ODA for health, just for health. And, you know, the darker countries are countries that have so you'll see 50 to 70% or even 75% of the budget of the share of the ODA coming from the U.S., right? And you can see a lot of those darker countries are in Africa. So we have a lot of countries where a lot of the money we're getting for health came from the U.S. As we know, USAID, they've eliminated USAID, they're stopping a lot of this, and some European countries are starting to do the same, right? So we're going to have some challenges here, which is how are we going to step in to fill that gap. Now we have some countries like Nigeria that have actually stepped in and said, okay, fine, US, how much are you pulling out? We're just going to get the budget and fill it. The question is, are other countries going to be able to do that, right? And if they do it, but it's going to come at the expense of something, because as somebody said this morning, we have finite resources. So this is a challenge, right? You have some countries in Southern Africa where over 90% of, say, HIV/AIDS budget was actually funded by the US, right? What happens to ARVs in those countries going forward? So those are some of the challenges we're going to have to deal with. Having said that, if we look at, we talked a bit about trade again this morning, and we did this analysis globally to look at, the dark blue is what we export, and the lighter blue is what we import. And the truth is, regardless of tariffs, no country is an island, no region is an island, right? We need to depend on each other. How is this going to change with the new tariffs? It will be interesting to see, right? But the reality is we're very, very interdependent today, across the world, right? And so we're tracking this, and we're going to see how this changes, but we are very, very interdependent around the world today. Just a few more slides. One is on infrastructure, right? We've not spoken much about infrastructure. But on infrastructure, as we know, we are the fastest urbanizing region in the world, right? Every year we have about 24 million Africans that move to cities. But the reality is they usually move to the one big city, right? On the left we have, for each country we put the biggest city and the second biggest city, right? That's what we listed here. And there are only 3 or 4 countries where the second biggest city is more than half the size of the first. So I'm from Cameroon. We have two cities that are about the same size, but everything else has one big city. And so the challenge is, how do we fix that city? We know all the challenges we're facing with those cities, but we need to build many more secondary cities across the continent. We need to build more. You can see the difference with other countries in the world. There's much more diversity in the cities that people can go to, can work, we can attract investments into, can attract industries into, right? So we need to focus more on building secondary cities across the continent. Now, on the positive side, we always get excited. We know that from a population perspective, we're going to have the largest workforce in the world. When I did this slide a few years ago, I was surprised to see. I knew, North America is flattening, Europe is slowing down. The truth is, China is going to lose 200 million people to the workforce in the next 25 years, right? So the world is going to turn somewhere for this workforce. It is going to turn a bit to India, but it's going to come to us, right? And also the reason it's going to come to us is because not just we have the people, but you can see the cost per labor here is the lowest, right? And so the question is, are we really positioned to make the most of this, right? I think this could be the global hotspot for talent as a continent if we really take advantage of it. But what's it going to take for us to get there? We can have those conversations. And then maybe 1 or 2 more slides, which is on the consumption front. We've been tracking this for a while, and you'll see sort of in the what I call the rising decade, 2000 to 2010, consumption rose 6% a year. But what was most exciting is that about 2/3 of that consumption was for people making more money, right? So then they could afford their first car, their first cell phone, they could afford the data cost, the first bicycle, right? So that's what was happening. Then between 2010 and 2020, consumption slowed down first, right? But more worrisome for me is that 3/4 of the consumption now is just more people coming into the consumer, new people into the consumer space, and they come in at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So then a lot of my clients were starting to think about how do you change your product mix to cater for those clients, for those customers. Now the last 3-4 years, you see a bit more of an uptick in consumption, but also a better balance between population and consumption per person, right? So hopefully we're starting to see a better balance there. Now the question is, if you start to project it, how far are we going to go? Are we going to see now an upswing again, which is what we're all hoping for. Finally, despite all of this, I always say despite all of this, I always ask this question when I do this presentation, which is, how many billion-dollar businesses do you think exist in Africa today? And I usually get an answer of 10, 50. And we track it, every few years. And we have $350 billion businesses. And I know SNN says SMEs are important. They are very important. But large businesses are hugely important as well for the continent, right? They're very important because they're the ones that actually in every country, more than half of the tax revenue is from the top 100 taxpayers, right? Even though we have millions of taxpayers in these countries. So they pay taxes. They help to professionalize the supply chain. They help all these SMEs that feed into them. But we have $350 billion businesses across Africa, and they're vibrant and they're resilient despite all the challenges. So just quickly, just a few points in summary as we continue the discussion today. One is, some early signs of some recovery and key indicators. There's some of the smaller countries, right? But what's it going to take to really make sure that this sticks? Secondly, is we still have a long way to go, right? If you look at a Pan-Africa perspective, right? And especially we need our large engines to start humming again, right? The Nigerias of the world, the South Africas of the world, the Moroccos, we need them to start humming again. The changes in the world order, whether it's the development assistance, whether it's the tariffs, in the short term, they'll definitely have an impact on us. They'll have an impact. But they also then force us to really think about how can we as Africans start to own our own development. We talk about it for too long. Now we're forced to do it, right? And how do we step up to the plate to make that happen? Fourth is, I always say our talent could be our next oil. I think we can, and they won't actually leave our shores to provide those services, right? We can use it through outsourcing. But we need a much more proactive coordination for it to happen. We're seeing some countries starting to do it, but there's a lot more that could be done. But I think talent for me is the next big thing for the continent. And then finally, despite all of that, private sector is still very resilient. Still a lot to be done there, but it's still very resilient with our 350 African business champions. So just wanted to share that with you, and then hopefully you'll provide some context for our further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leke, for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. Let's now move into our next sequence, where we'll explore how foreign direct investment is unlocking opportunity and driving Djibouti's economic transformation. And to guide us through it, let's welcome someone who has spent his career connecting talent, capital, and opportunity across Africa. Let's welcome Mr. Gavin Sirkin, founder and managing editor at Frontier Intelligence, please. Let's welcome Mr. Gavin Sirkin.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Hi everyone. Really hard to follow McKinsey because it's the one moment where everyone puts down their phones and stops emailing and takes lots of photos of the screen. So we can't match that, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll have a very lively discussion. We have we're here to discuss public meets private, forging alliances for a prosperous future. And we have some of the real giants of the public and the private world. So I want to welcome to the stage Dr. Slim Feriani, who you heard from before, CEO of the Fonds Souverain de Djibouti, Mr. Lionel Sinsu, who is the former Prime Minister of Benin and co-founder of Southbridge, Mr. Solomon Kaynor, Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization at the Africa Development Bank, Mr. George Olaka, CFO for Arise IIP and Arise IS. And last but not least, you saw Axian in one of the McKinsey slides there as one of the giants of the financial world in Africa, Mr. Hassan Jaber, the CEO of Axian Telecom. So a big round of applause for this panel. Now, why are we discussing PPPs here today? The reason is that PPPs are quite literally reshaping the global investment scene, not just in Africa, around the world. $1.8 trillion was mobilized in PPPs last year alone, $1.8 trillion. In Africa, what does it mean? Roughly 1/3 of all African investment in infrastructure is through PPPs. So PPPs are the solution to plugging the $100 billion infrastructure gap. Djibouti's 2035 vision makes this very clear. They're targeting $3 billion, which is no small amount in PPP-driven projects by spanning logistics, trade, digital, to create much more of a hub, even more of a hub than we're seeing at the moment in Djibouti. So how do we unlock this potential? How do we make PPPs even more significant? Well, let me first of all turn to Lionel Zinzu, because I was having a good conversation with Lionel earlier, the former Prime Minister of Benin and the co-founder of Southbridge. So Lionel straddles both camps, if you like, having been in the public and the private. And I said, what needs to happen in PPP? And he said rather cryptically, it needs another P. I said, hold that thought, because I want you to tell the room. So, Lionel, what is the fourth P that PPP needs?
Thank you, Gavin, for this question. Bonjour à tous. If you allow me, I will speak in Canadian, mixing French and English. But the fourth P, word in English and French, it is philanthropes. I think that there is a new important partner in blended finance, which is the partnership of public, private, and philanthropy. Philanthropy has been very American in the last years. The likes of the Bezos Earth Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates, the WRI, and so on. I mean, they now are prepared for some projects to take the first losses in order to de-risk an investment, or to supply grants which are able to lower the cost, the interest rates for projects, and specifically in developing countries of Africa and Latin America. Donc, juste en français, je pense que les philanthropes peuvent jouer un rôle très important pour abaisser les coûts de l'investissement, mais surtout pour dérisquer en acceptant de prendre une partie du coût du risque, c'est-à-dire en faisant, au fond, en créant un peu de sécurité, en prenant dans les dettes, si vous voulez, dans les crédits que l'on fait, toujours, il y a un risque, il y a des pertes, il y a des non-performing loans, et il faut qu'il y ait quelqu'un pour acheter ce risque-là. Bon. Et maintenant, ça commence à se compter en milliards de dollars. Voilà, c'est ça le quatrième P. Mais ayant écouté Adamassou tout à l'heure, je dirais c'est PPPM. And the M is the multilateral African DFIs. Because it is a revolution. What TDB is doing, what BOAD, BDSA are doing, what Afrexim Bank is doing, what you are doing, my dear brother, with the African Development Bank, it is a renaissance. It's completely new in terms of rating, in terms of access to market. And the problem is that the money we need in Africa for our investments are not in the budget. This is constrained. Is less and less in the public aid, because you have seen the Trump shock in terms of humanitarian aid. But what you have not seen as much, but has been very important, is the UK saying, I will finance my defense effort by reducing public aid to development by 40%. And the figure for France is, in 2 years, minus 37% of public aid for development. So humanitarian, it is a major shock. Billions of US dollars. But in terms of development and investment, what the UK and the European Union have to do in order to finance their defense of effort is another shock. So we need, as a substitute, to be able to be to the financial market, where you have an immense reserve, but we have to lower the risk and improve. You cannot improve your AAA, but they has a bit of space to get a AAA because their first rating has been a AA, and each of our African DFIs now, Afrexim Bank, everybody, are able to go to the market because the private sector and the financial market and the asset managers are the only solution if we want to bridge the gap, the immense gap which has been created very recently. En français, ça veut dire le marché financier, et qui aujourd'hui est en train, en Afrique, de permettre un accès plus facile au marché financier, ce sont d'abord nos multilatéraux, la BAD, la TDB, la BOAD, etc., l'Afrexim Bank, et ceux qui s'occupent de capital patient long, comme l'AFC par exemple, dans les infrastructures, comme Africa 50. C'est tout cela qui sont nos bataillons, en fait, pour combler le choc énorme de la réduction dramatique américaine et probablement européenne de l'aide publique humanitaire ou dédiée au développement. Voilà en français ce que je voulais dire. Et nos gouvernements aussi peuvent aller encore sur le marché, mais pas très nombreux, parce que certains sont surendettés. Un pays comme le mien, quand j'étais Premier ministre, levait uniquement des francs CFA à Abidjan sur un an, avec un travail sérieux du gouvernement. 10 ans après, ce pays lève des dollars et des euros sur les marchés financiers du monde entier à 30 ans. En moyenne à 10, mais avec des tranches à 30 ans. Ça, ce sont des instruments qui sont des instruments de marché. Et si vous ajoutez nos DFIs, you add up our DFIs and the disciplined governments, we have a private resource to really tap in if we want to substitute what has been cancelled in terms of our resources. So, c'est un tournant.
Just in the interest of the poor guys in the translation box.
I'm sorry for the translator. No, but it's but being a francophone in a francophone country, I think it's very important. Comme on dirait à l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, il faut défendre la langue.
Okay, merci. So, I want to drill down to real projects now. Lionel, and then we'll go to Arise because this concerns both of you. One very important PPP in Benin that people may be familiar with, I am from my work with Africa Finance Corporation, is the cotton production project, which is creating T-shirts for export to the US. And you mentioned the Trump era and the challenges. bring us to reality. How is a project like that being affected by the trade tariffs? Lionel first, and then we'll go to Arise.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pity because we have started with Arise. We have started 1 year ago, and in a system where we had no tariff to access the US market. And now we will be under a high level of tariff. Having said that, you know...
What is the rate, just to be clear, for Benin?
I don't know, it's unclear. It's unclear for many countries, but it will be not less than 20%. But it's 20% of what? It's 20% of the cost, not the price for the consumer. The price for the consumer is something like 80% of the total price, and what we export from Benin or Togo will be only 20%. So it will be 20% of the consumer price. So don't imagine that your Ralph Lauren polo made in Benin will be more expensive by 20% of 100%. No, it will be 20% of 20%, what we export. What remains the most important cost is the distribution cost, the transport cost within the USA. It is the taxes, the value-added taxes, and so on and so forth. So it's not 20% immediate inflation. Let's be clear. And second remark, and I discovered it's not that known. The trade in between Africa and USA has been divided by 2 under the 8 years of the Barack Obama presidency. La baisse du commerce entre les États-Unis et l'Afrique, c'est moins 50%. So we had a shock which is more impacting than the Trump shock. And what is the cause of that? Is that by exporting hydrocarbons and becoming the number 1 exporter, or second with Saudi Arabia, the USA have not imported from Angola and so on, and Nigeria, or Algeria from gas, the hydrocarbons of Africa. And this major shift means that we had to go back to Europe, to India, to China, change completely the client system. Les gens semblent ignorer que nous avons eu une division par 2 graduelle pendant 10 ans des États-Unis, du commerce des États-Unis avec l'Afrique. Donc le choc actuel est un petit choc par rapport à ce qui s'est passé. Et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Il s'est passé qu'on s'est tourné vers l'Asie et l'Europe. On va faire la même chose en beaucoup moins fort avec les t-shirts. C'est tout.
Thank you. George Alaka from Arise, tell me from your perspective how the Trump tariffs, how this is all impacting in Benin, and maybe exploring the other PPPs, because Arise has multiple PPPs in various different countries in Africa. I think it's like 7 or 8. So perhaps fill us in.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Let me admit that it is always a problem speaking after, former Minister of Economy and a diplomat. But I'll try to put in my 2 cents about this. And I think for us at Arise and working with all our stakeholders and partners, it is not lost to us that the US market is a big market. And the US or European market is only important for us in terms of the trends, the changing consumer trends, and what they ask for. But that is not lost to us that we have a bigger market in Africa. And if we are looking at 300 million customers in US or thereabout, we've just seen from McKinsey that we are projected to grow to 1.6 billion in 2030. So the question is that even as we chase the American market, the European market, I think there's a bigger stake, there's a bigger market in Africa that we need to look at. Much of the textile imports is coming from Asia, from, of course, the Europeans. So we supply raw cotton, we supply lint, but then we import goods worth much more than what we as Africans are producing. So yes, the Trump tariffs will have a problem for us in the short term, but I believe it is in the resilience that we bring in that we are going to be able to circumvent some of the impacts of this tariff. Let me give you an example. We have organically grown cotton in Africa, and that is what the world is looking for. New technology is coming up in textile, for example, which is going to use less water. In fact, the plant that has been put up in Benin is using 95% less water. In terms of 95% of the water you put in the first time is recycled. And therefore, even in terms of economy, which hasn't been achieved in Asia, hasn't been achieved in India, is the kind of technology we are putting in now, which is more resilient. If you look at sustainability, if you look at being able to do a trace from farm to shop, it is something that is more possible in Africa than Asia. And we believe that as consumer trends change, especially in the Western world, then what we are putting in Africa is going to be, first of all, more sustainable, and we are going to drive demand just from a traceability aspect. The fact that the cotton that we are using is organically grown cotton. We have to put ourselves in a stage where we are more competitive, even if not in price, but in all other aspects. As we have been told, and as we know, Africa has the youngest population, the cheapest labor input. Textile is a volume business. It is a very thin margin business. And therefore, with the kind of population that we are having, with the kind of demand that we have in Africa, I think for us and for these zones, competitiveness is the key to being able to, first and foremost, offset the Trump tariffs. Two, we need to work on an Africa-wide trade system. And I think at Arise, through our partners, Afrexim Bank, AU, what we are doing is we are coming up with what is called Africa Trade and Distribution Company, which is going to do and promote inter-Africa trade. And if we can promote inter-Africa trade, then we raise ourselves to a situation where we are going to be the partner of choice in Africa, as opposed to us having to go and look for markets out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, George. Solomon Kainer, let's go to AFDB and give us sort of the big picture, because we've zoomed in on some very specific country, Benin, and also issues. What's the big picture look like from AFDB? How well is Africa doing on PPPs? What more needs to be done? What can AFDB do? What can people in this room do that's not being done at the moment?
Okay. Thank you very much. Je sais Djibouti est un pays francophonie, mais je ne parle pas bien français, donc je parle anglais. Merci. No, thank you very much. A lot has been done in PPPs in Africa, or I think the record we had right before COVID was that about 30% of the infrastructure projects were being done through the private sector in Africa. And almost all of infrastructure projects are some form of PPPs. However, the imperative for public-private partnerships was probably not as evident before because the fiscal space for a lot of countries was such that projects that could be public sector financed would be public sector financed, and then the projects that could be purely privately concessioned would also be privately concessioned, such as port concessions and things of that sort. But with the limited fiscal space, we've begun to see that there's a greater pressure and urgency in doing PPPs. However, you can't go really from 0 to 100 immediately. So one of the things that we're seeing that has to be done, on the government side is that they have to reform the legal, regulatory, institutional frameworks. They also have to build capacity because PPPs are complex contracts in which you're trying to assign risk to the party that's best able to handle that risk. So it's really a complex contract. And so there has to be capacity really on the government side, that can equal the capacity on the private sector side that comes also with a barrage of lawyers. So there has to be almost equal capacity. So that's something, we're working on as well. Then in addition, I think we heard it earlier today that there's a dearth of bankable projects, and there are different ways in which you can create those bankable projects. Some of it is really through transaction advisory that would be done by the likes of ourselves, IFC, and of course, the commercial institutions who can advise on, structuring PPPs. A lot of it would be done really through project development. And yes, we've set up institutions like Africa 50, which is the premier infrastructure project developer in Africa. But we need more project developers. And we also recognize that project development is actually a local business. So it's important to create a facility that would support local developers, but also experienced developers. And so this is why we at the AFDB, initiated the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. This is a $500 million facility, but ultimately local developers, experienced developers in partnership will be able to access this facility to actually initiate green infrastructure development. And what we're trying to do is bring money and skills and partnership together so that we change the gestation period from 7 to 10 years to really around 3 years. So we're also trying to work on originating more PPPs, especially. And then third would be, we've got to find ways to fund this project. I do agree with Atmasu, that capital has not always been the problem. But however, we have to really understand that capital doesn't always understand the environment, especially when we're talking about foreign direct investments. So this is where we as MDBs, are beginning to develop more risk mitigation tools. So, for example, Lake Turkana, the wind power project in Kenya, we provided what we call a partial risk guarantee. And this is to counter-guarantee government's obligation in the power purchase agreement. Okay, so that gives great confidence not just to the lenders, but also to the sponsors of the project. So risk mitigation is important. And part of the reason I honored Slim's invitation to come here is I believe that the African sovereign wealth funds and the African strategic investment funds are sort of the next generation of risk mitigation. And part of it is because they're commercially run, they're well governed, they understand the private sector, but they also understand government's strategic priorities. And so with that, you bring the element of an investor, which means governments have skin in the game. So, because with PPPs, 20-year PPPs, you have to assume that there will be some trouble along the way. But do you have the right parties that can actually bring things together, have really a coherent discussion, and then, lead to solution? Yes, we as the AFDB could do that. We do that. But but having really the African sovereign wealth funds, like FSD in Djibouti, is critical. And so for me, if I'm taking a look at an infrastructure project in the country, one of the first things I do is really find out whether there's an African sovereign wealth fund or strategic investment fund involved. We have partnered with this group. I mean, Francis in Senegal, I see Aminu is walking in, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, the Ethiopian Investment Holdings, IFMA Capital, and of course SLIM as well. We've partnered with this grouping to bring them together. So we're the honorary MDB partner, and that's because we really see a lot of value. Part of the reason we created the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa is to create additional capacity to also be leveraged by the likes of, FSD in Djibouti to create projects. So, we're seeing different forms of PPPs. We've even now begun to look at another example, which we call infrastructure asset recycling, because a lot of countries, including partners such as ourselves, have financed infrastructure projects with grants in the past. I'll give you the example of Senegambia, the Senegambia Bridge. We financed that with about $100 million worth of grants. That project is operational. However, it could actually be enhanced and developed better. So guess what? We're doing what we call infrastructure asset recycling. We're actually recycling that to the private sector on a 20-year concession, but it brings money into government to actually invest in the next PPP project. There's no traffic risk, so there's no need for traffic guarantees or revenue guarantees, because it's proven right now. These are some of the innovations we're looking at. So I know it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but the idea is that, yes, we're seeing actually a greater partnership between governments and private sector on PPPs. The suspicion level is coming down. The negotiations on really assignment of risk is picking up to the party that can best handle it. We're seeing more innovations, and we do see a long-term potential for PPPs.
It's a great specific view. Thank you, Solomon. Hassan Jaber from Axian Telecom as the private sector representative, pure private sector on this panel. How does it look from you? Because I know that Axian Telecom has many inclusion projects, links up with governments. What's been your experience of PPP? What do you need more from governments in terms of support for projects? What do you have in the aspirations from Axian Telecom?
Thank you for the question. For us, as a priority, as a vision, is to accelerate in the continent the digital and the financial inclusion. And to do so, we need to be working closely with the government and to have the right policies that will allow us to accelerate whether the coverage or whether to accelerate the access to the technology. In order to accelerate the development in technology, to access, for example, what we were talking about earlier, the artificial intelligence, or to accelerate the upgrade of our network in order to have access to 3G and 5G, you need two things. You need two criteria to be met. One is access to the technology, which means the know-how, and access to capital. And the government have to, and referring back to the Prime Minister, have to encourage more and more privatization of the infrastructure in order to be able to bring partners that are credible that have access as well to the capital, have access to the financial market to allow to bring the funds into the country in order to build that infrastructure. And by doing that, the government will be focusing on setting the policies, the right policies, and the the right guidelines in order to make sure that whomever they are partnering with is actually delivering on their strategic objectives, mainly in terms of the right quality of service, of the data, or of the voice telecom services that we are providing, or by giving access to that technology in a rural area and in underserved markets. By having this balance between the government policies and the encouragement to the private sector, and bringing a credible partner, mainly partners that are here to stay, are not here on the short term, are here working on the long term. And that allows really a success ratios. The success ratios is measured by, like what I give the examples in our markets, where you already are 95% having a 4G population coverage, which means giving access. We are already having in Madagascar, for example, more than 10,000 kilometers of fiber optic backbone, etc. So the main criteria is actually to have this right partnership and have the companies to be working in freely, in order to give access to the new technology, but by following the guidelines and the policies of the government.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least is Dr. Slim Feriani, who everyone in this room is very familiar with. And by the way, Slim made clear that everyone needed to speak before him, wanted to give a platform to everyone. Slim, how's this look from Djibouti? Because, there's some very important PPPs, the Red Sea Power Project, not least. You've been through some challenges in getting that off the ground. It wasn't an easy project. How does this look in terms of what PPPs, how you overcome the challenges, how you get through there, the partners that you need, and how you make this sustainable, and how you get to that $3 billion ultimately?
Thank you, Gavin. The question is, how does it look? It looks beautiful. Djibouti is beautiful. I'll use that word. So it's beautiful to have this room. Everyone's still sticking around. So I'm diverging a bit, but I really have to credit everyone still around. It's been a marathon so far. We're not done yet. So as we say, the night is young, but the day is young. And as you can see around, I think the magic word, I think, is partnership. We talked about PPP, triple P, 4 Ps, 4 PMs. But I think P for partnership is the buzzword. That's the one that unites us here. If you look around this room, there's partnership all over the room. Private sector, public sector, local, international, DFIs, you name it. And that's what it's all about. I think you can't do it on your own. You can't, one hand doesn't clap, as we say in French. And I'm sticking with English, even though I was going to use le français, which should have been far easier, y compris pour nos médias, mais bon. We'll have to carry on with English as the common language for all of us. I would like to also mention one key partnership which hasn't been talked much, I think, is this one with La Poste. I'm diverging a bit, but this is crucial also for especially the international guests. This is an amazing, I think, gift that La Poste has done, La Poste de Djibouti. This is an amazing card, and there's a stamp. We've done it last year, so we carry on with the tradition, and you can send it and let me know how long it takes, by the way, to get home. Okay, so we want to know how long it takes for La Poste de Djibouti and other posts to get this to wherever, Madagascar. So please make sure that you pick one of the cards, and then go back to the fact that it's all about partnership. It's about willingness to do things. Now, for us as a sovereign wealth fund, the P for public sector is what unites the whole thing, and the rest of the P's are very welcome. So, whether it's the private sector, the likes of Action, or whomever they are, DFIs, our friends from AFDB or Arise, or all of them. At the end of the day, what we give, I think the word insurance could be used here. We give a bit of, comfort. People feel comfortable having the sovereign wealth fund of a country, X, in this case Djibouti, having the interests aligned. So instead of you taking 100% of the risk, and you can do it as a foreign investor on FDI, you could have the sovereign wealth fund of Djibouti coming in at, usually we target 20 to 25%. because our objective is not to be operators of things as our business model. Our business model is to be a strategic financial investor. But having a sovereign wealth fund, I mean, we are under the oversight. My direct boss is the President of Djibouti. The President of Djibouti is our tutelle. They oversee us. So obviously, when you have doers like that, when you have political will, you can fast-track things. And this is where bureaucracy sometimes slows things down. And that's the reality of things. So this is why when we talk public versus private, often we see the speed of the private sector a bit quicker, if not a lot quicker, depending on the country. But having a sovereign wealth fund, an institution like NSIA, Nigeria or Azerbaijan, or in this case Djiboutian Sovereign Wealth Fund being on your side, getting the interests aligned, I think can fast-track things and facilitate things. And in the end, we're not charities either. So we're not a charity. We are here to build a multi-generational saving spot for the future generations of Djibouti in this case, and therefore we need to generate returns. The capital that we have, we need to make the best use of it, and the best use of it is with people who have done it before. We cannot afford as Djibouti to be guinea pigs. We cannot start something from scratch that's never been done before. So we want to do it with people who have done it. The Actions of this world, etc., have done it, and we would like them to do it here. And then, we ride the wave with them. So in the end, we want to fast track. Time is money. I mean, le temps c'est de l'argent, and we need to fast track things. Expectations are so high. Human beings are so, impatient to get things done, and that's why it's better to hold hands together and make it happen. And I'm looking around, and once again, I'd like to thank the guys like Carlos, etc., who are here, who believe in this country and who believe in Africa. Because in the end, that's what unites us also, the partnership with African countries. So I'm the host, so I cannot abuse the time, because I can talk on and on, but I hope it gave you a bit of messages, and we'll get to, to reconnect, and everyone hopefully will make sure that they connect with us, with the team of Sovereign Fund. And we have so many VIPs around that it's very humbling to be around and taking, all this time. So thank you, Gavin. It's a challenge, there's lunch out there, and us, not an easy one.
You definitely can't abuse time when lunch is out there. So I want to thank the panel for, I think, whether it's triple P or 4 Ps, it's certainly been a triple A discussion. So thank you. And I'll hand back to Anne-Marie.
We have a picture for the panels. I don't get a chance to have all these guys together at the same time. So I'm breaking protocol and taking a picture.
No worries at all. Well, as this is happening, I'll just have a few instructions for you all before we go to lunch. I can hear some stomachs rumbling. Please leave your headsets here in the room. You'll find them when you come back. And I have also another announcement. We have our parallel sessions, which will start at 2:30. The one on urban development, tourism and hospitality will be in room Pearl 3. And the one on energy mix in Africa will be here in this room. So this is for the parallel sessions that will start at 2:30. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Merci. Merci. Yes, a big round of applause as well for this wonderful solutions-oriented conversation. Thank you very much, Gavin, as well. Brilliant job. I know that everybody is ready for lunch now. To our distinguished guests who have been invited to the Institutional Investors and Sovereignty Wealth Funds lunch, please proceed to Pearl 3 room, which is next door. For everybody else, there's a wonderful lunch waiting for you in the Nara restaurant. Bon appétit à tous, and we'll meet here at 4 p.m.
Thank you.